Good afternoon. I wasn't planning to start the Mackinac Conference with this presentation, but I felt like I needed to address the story in the Detroit News today and make it clear exactly what happened. I have spent the last 5 years in partnership with the Detroit Police Department and the City Law Department to rid this city of dishonest towers. Everything I did was in the singular pursuit of that goal. I have never disclosed the identity of anyone I ever knew to be a confidential source in my life. I would not do that. I did not know there was any confidential source involved in this case. I have enormous regard for the U.S. Attorney's Office. They have made this entire region a better place with their anti-corruption activities, and their leadership on gun violence is the best in the country. I would never have done anything to undercut their efforts, and any suggestion in today's story that I did is just plain nonsense. Let me tell you what happened. The roots of the towing corruption problem in this city go back to the Board of Police Commissioners in 2011, where they set up a lax permit rotation system. And they did it on a no-bid basis, so that towers in this city got permits without bidding. And these permits are extremely lucrative. Not only do you make the money from the tows, but you can make hundreds of dollars a day on storage. And as people in the city know, when their cars are towed, it's not unusual to have several hundred or thousands of dollars in bills by the time you get them back. The process is supposed to work that all of the towers that have a permit, usually there's an average of 20, but it fluctuates, are supposed to go in order so that everybody gets every 20th tow. For years, dishonest towers have found ways to break the rules to get tows much more frequently. And it is a huge risk to the Detroit Police Department, because when you think about this, our officers are out there. When they arrest somebody for drunk driving, the car has to be towed. They come to a scene of an accident, the cars have to be towed. They find a stolen car, the car has to be towed. And if an individual officer phones a tower directly to have them pick it up, the city doesn't pay the bill, you do, and so there's no central process. And so we have seen for years the way towers have gotten around this, and in 2017 the feds indicted 6 police officers for taking bribes, in essence, for giving tows out of the rotation. But the thing that hit us the hardest in 2017 was when Deputy Police Chief Celia Washington was indicted by the feds on a tow rotation issue. And she and Gaspar Fiore, a tower, were indicted and convicted. And if you followed that case, the feds had Gaspar Fiore on a wiretap, got Celia Washington on the phone calls, and convicted both of them. When that happened, Chief Craig did one of the finest things I've seen him do from a leadership standpoint. He decided he was going to rid that department of dishonest towers, and they were a DPD tow process. And so what he did was he himself started several investigations on officers within the department. Then he took an assistant chief by the name of James White and put him in charge of finding a new towing system and investigating the existing companies. We brought in our best attorney, Chuck Ramey, from the city law department to back them in this effort. And what we did was set up parallel investigations. And this is really important to understand. The feds do a really good job of getting the person who took the bribe. Our job is to make sure the dishonest towers are gone so there's no bribes in the future. And so we set out to rid the department of any dishonest towers. And that means we investigated the towers. DPD investigated towers for excessive charges, for improper rotations, and the like. So you had DPD investigations going on as well. Chief Craig and I went to the Board of Police Commissioners, to the leadership, and we said it's time to end this no-bid permit process. Put an end to it and move on. The Board of Police Commissioners wasn't really willing to end it, but they said our problem is dishonest towers. Let's terminate them. And to their credit, the Board of Police Commissioners in 2017 terminated several towers. That created a storm of controversy and litigation in which the towers came back and sued. And to me, this is the most misleading aspect of today's story. To read the story, you would think the feds were doing all the investigating and Detroit had no responsibility except to stay out of the way. The fact of the matter is the Detroit Police Department and the Detroit Law Department were doing our own efforts very diligently to get rid of these towers. And so following the termination of several towers, we were embroiled in litigation. And as the investigations continued, we became concerned that while there were honest towers, there were a whole lot who weren't. We were concerned when we got rid of all the dishonest towers, there wouldn't be enough capacity in the city. And so Chief Craig and I went to the Board of Police Commissioners and said, the Detroit Police Department needs to have its own towing operation. We've got to have our own capacity. We can't be dependent. And again, the Board of Police Commissioners stepped up. And in 2018, the Board of Police Commissioners authorized DPD to run its own towing operation. Again, huge controversy, huge litigation from the towers. And again, Chuck Ramey, representing the Detroit Police Department, succeeded in that case. We knew that we were continuing to have a fight and we were going to stay with it until the no-bid permit process was gone. But without a doubt, the biggest surprise came in the spring of 2021 when Andre Spivey contacted me to say, and I never had any hint this was coming, he said, I made a terrible mistake. He said, I got in financial trouble. I borrowed a large amount of money from a tower. He told me the tower was a tower we knew very well from our investigations and our litigation. He says, I meant to pay him back and I didn't. The feds have us on a wire. I expect us to get indicted soon. That if this was just me, none of my colleagues were involved, I've confessed all of this to the feds. But my attorney's trying to work on a cooperation agreement. I'm not sure that it's going to work. But I know what a shock this is going to be to the city after the Leland case, and I wanted you to know that this is about to come out. Now, I like most people in the city, I never saw this coming from Andre Spivey, minister, strong family, and never seen any sign of this. And so I almost didn't know what to say, but what he had told me was he had a dishonest tower who had paid him off. Andre Spivey never said a word about a confidential source, nothing like that. I walked out of that conversation believing that I had just been told that I have a city councilman who has taken a bribe from a dishonest tower. Now, if anybody had suggested there was a confidential source involved, I wouldn't have said a word. And the suggestion in today's Detroit News is that the mayor of the city should be told about bribery and a dishonest tower and not say anything. I don't believe that. I was a prosecutor for 3 years. When I learn of a crime, I believe it's my responsibility to act, and I did exactly what I should have done. I reached out and advised the Detroit Police Department of what I learned. I reached out and advised Chuck Ramey and the Law Department of what I learned, because both of them had active investigations and litigations with this tower, and we needed to make sure that this individual would not be able to continue doing business. But then we needed to do something further, and we decided that this was time. I knew the public in this town was pretty weary of all these charges, and that when the Spivey charge came out, there was going to be the question, is this ever going to end? And so I laid out a plan with the team that we would get the Board of Police Commissioners to finally eliminate the no-bid towing permits. And so we worked intensely on a plan to do that. On July 28th, Andre Spivey was indicted. 6 weeks later, the Board of Police Commissioners voted finally to eliminate the no-bid permitting process. We were spending our time working on that. We weren't sitting around gossiping. We were doing what we believed we should be doing for the city of Detroit. And I want to be very clear on this. No one to this day from any federal agency has ever reached out to me and suggested that I did anything that was wrong. I've not heard a word from them. I spent 3 years as a prosecutor. As a prosecutor, you went straight ahead when you had evidence of a crime. If the feds called you and said, hey, we've got this back off, you respected that. If the feds said, hey, would you please be quiet and stay away from this individual, this person is working with us, we respect that. That's the way I always worked. Nobody from any federal agency ever suggested to me that this tower had become a confidential source, or I would have honored that. But the reality is that what I did was this. I never knew the source was confidential. I was told by a councilman about information, and I acted on it properly and appropriately, going to the law department, going to the police department, and then removing this no-bid permit process from the city. And as I say, to this day, no one from any federal agency has reached out to me and suggested they had any problem with anything I did. And with that, I will take any questions. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Chad Livengood, now back at Detroit News. Mr. Mayor, who outside of the law department and DPD did you identify the name of this tower to?
I'm not going to get into individual people and draw them in, but my management team was actively engaged in developing the plan to get rid of the no-bid towers. We put a system in place that now you're going to have to go through a rigorous bid process to get the work. There's going to be computer software monitoring you and the ability to remove you quickly. We were all working on this. None of us thought the name of a dishonest tower was anything confidential. And so there were people internally who knew the name, but that wasn't our focus. At no point did we ever disclose it to the public, and of course it still hasn't been disclosed to the public this day. But I was not focused on the confidentiality because I never had any reason to believe that the feds considered them confidential. If I had, I would have handled it differently.
Okay, Mayor Charlie Langton, WJ and Fox 2. Mayor, you're a prosecutor, ex-prosecutor. Do you believe it's illegal to disclose a confidential source anyway?
If you worked for the U.S. Attorney, if you were a member of the grand jury, absolutely. Charlie, if somebody walks up to you on the street today and says this, do you have a right to report it? But in my case, it didn't matter. I had no reason to believe this person was a confidential source. I thought that they had been just like Gasper Fiore, who got caught on a wiretap by the feds and got Celia Washington. I assumed they had gotten this tower on a wiretap and gotten Andre Spivey. Nothing Spivey said suggested to me that it was anything different than that. But we didn't talk about the details of it. We talked really about, his situation. Yes.
I guess to follow up, did you or did you not talk to someone outside of city government and DPD about the identity of this person and why?
Again, if you tell me who you're talking about, I don't know. Did I consult with somebody on advice on how to put together a new towing system or how to handle something? I'm not going to respond to the entire universe, but if there's a suggestion I talk to somebody, tell me who it is and I'll respond. I will say this again. I was intensely focused on removing a tower I believe to be dishonest from the system, and I was intensely focused on getting rid of the no-bid permit process. I was not focused on a confidential source because I didn't believe the source was confidential. And so if you tell me there was an individual conversation with somebody, I could tell you why I had it and for what purpose, but I have no way to answer some kind of general anonymous statement. Mm-hmm.
What was the reason for sharing the informant's name with people outside of the law department And do you agree that you're referenced as the public official who shared the informant's name as stated in Andre Spivey's sentencing memo?
Again, I was unaware that I was a public official. I only heard that for the first time from a reporter from the Detroit News. So assuming that this is me that was being referred to, I'm answering the questions, but it certainly seems to match up in the language. And as I said, the reason that we were talking about it is talked to the law department, I talked to DPD, I talked to the management team that was putting together the new towing system. And we did it because that's our responsibility. And at no point did I believe, again, the question says an informant. I had no reason to believe the individual was a confidential source.
Next one is from Joe Gullen. During his meeting with the mayor about the federal investigation in June, did Spivey say anything about the towing industry figure wearing a wire or displaying any other behavior that could indicate the towing industry figure was working with law enforcement?
No, Spivey didn't indicate any anger at all toward the tower that he told me he borrowed money from. So he said nothing at all to suggest it was anything other than the feds had caught both of them.
And this is also from Joe Gullen. After the Spivey talk, why not check with the feds first about the nature of the investigation before talking to DPD Law Department?
Again, I went and got legal advice from my own team and my own department and acted accordingly. Anything else? All right, thank you very much for giving me the time.